Lovely, thank you. Nice to be back. I'm still in Jamaica and still enjoying nice weather. We have on stage, and I don't know if there were introductions done prior to me joining, but Sean Boyd, chair of Agnico Eagle Mines, one of the great gold mining companies in the world. Tim Murphy, executive vice president of AECON, one of the great builders in this country. And John Stackhouse, executive vice president, Royal Bank of Canada, Canada's premier financial institution, and a great export also. With me on the line is Louise Blais. Louise is the senior special advisor to the Business Council of Canada and is very well known as an experienced diplomat for the government of Canada. I thought, my name is Doug Turnbull. I'm with Morningstar, a financial service business, and I also was an investment banker for many, many years. I'm an old friend of the Arctic 360. I think the organization is unique in Canada in that it brings together so many circumpolar experts to talk about big themes and big issues. And I know that you've had a great session so far. When Jessica and I were discussing the conference, I provocatively posed the question, does Canada really deserve sovereignty of our north? It may seem obvious that however you define the north, it's an integral and historic part of our country, one that many Canadians take great pride in recognizing and acknowledging. However, I would argue that successive generations of our political leaders have ignored, materially underfunded, and generally taken the North for granted. You all know the litany of problems that our supposed governance of the North of Canada has resulted in: substandard healthcare, poverty, lack of clean water, etc. But what's less well understood is just how difficult it is to do business in the North. And there's plenty of blame to go around. Governments have failed to provide a necessary regulatory framework. Governments have failed to provide essential infrastructure, broadband, roads, ports, transmissions, many of the things that you've been talking about here over the last few days. I argue that governments have failed to provide the vision required to demonstrate that Canada's North is essential to Canada's competitiveness. Governments must answer to voters, and they're just simply too few in the North. Businesses, on the other hand, are eager and willing to invest, but only when the right governance conditions and commercial feasibility exists for investment. Corporations must answer to their shareholders and other stakeholders, and too few are in the North to have a big impact. And First Nations communities are caught in the middle, but in many cases lack resources, social and fiscal capacity, and governance models to participate in any meaningful way. I say that while acknowledging there are plenty of examples of successful Aboriginally owned businesses doing essential work all across Canada. The topic of today's session is equally provocative. Is there a will and a capacity to do business in the North? We've brought together our panel of experts to discuss. But before we start, I'd like to do a round table and give each of our panelists time to introduce themselves and share some introductory comments. And perhaps, Sean, if I could start with you.
Sure. My name is Sean Boyd, and I'm the chair of Agnico Eagle Mines Limited.
Do we need to do something with this? No.
The chair of Agnico Eagle Mines Limited. I've been at Agnico for 40 years. We're currently now the largest mining company in Canada, second largest gold producer in the world, and started very small. And a big part of our business is Canada. 3/4 of our production is Canada. There's a renaissance in terms of the appreciation and understanding of mining and what mining brings to the table. And we're in a particularly strong position to bring the tremendous benefits of mining to Canada's north. And Canada is better served with more mining companies based in Canada and more mines operating in Canada, and we'll talk about that. today as we go through.
Hi, does that working or should I use? Good afternoon. My name is John Stackhouse. I work in the office of the CEO at RBC. Among my responsibilities is overseeing a group called RBC Thought Leadership, which is a kind of think tank within the organization. We've got a team of crackerjack researchers who look at innovation, AI, at skills, at macroeconomic policy, including the trade dialogue now with the United States, as well as other issues affecting Canada's prosperity, trying to promote ideas and informed discussion about what Canada needs to succeed and thrive in the 2030s and beyond. This is front and center, so it's a real privilege to be invited to be part of this conversation. A big shout out to Jessica and the Arctic 360 crew. This is an amazing thing you've got going, and we'll need a lot more of this in the years ahead. RBC does a lot of banking, both in person and virtually, in all aspects of the North. We're very proud of our branch in Iqaluit, which is the farthest north branch in our network, and a really important part of what we do, including the services that we provide to commercial operations, government operations, and to individuals. Happy to speak about that more in the conversation. And Doug and Louise, great to see you on the screen. I look forward to the conversation.
Hi, I'm Tim Murphy. I just want to say I'm really not a big fan of Doug Turnbull right now.
Okay.
Nothing. It's weather related. So I'm Executive Vice President, Chief Strategic Affairs Officer at AECON, Canada's, we call it #1 infrastructure group. We build all kinds of things with about 75-80% of our business in Canada, as well as operations in the US and the Caribbean. We build ports, airports, roads, bridges, dams, power generation, transmission lines, basically any big infrastructure that you need, we build. We've also one of the few construction companies that actually has a reconciliation plan. We have more than 25 joint ventures with Indigenous communities, including a very successful one with 6 nations called A6N, majority owned by the First Nation, heading towards 30 million in revenue as a JV that AECON started. So that notion of working with the communities to help build things that help those communities thrive is built into the DNA of the company, which has been around for more than 100 years, built things like the CN Tower, for example, as part of what it's done. And I'm very pleased to say that since I arrived at the company 6 months ago, the share price is up 60%.
Well said. Louise.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be with you virtually. I'm sorry, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I'll be back in Canada next week, but really happy to be here. Today I'm representing in some capacity the Business Council of Canada, as well as going from my experience as a diplomat and some of the work that I've done recently to talk about how we need to really build a foreign policy that's truly centered around our narrow interest. And one of those is obviously the security of the Arctic and the sovereignty of the Arctic, as well as it's the nexus of economic development. All those 3 things come together, and I've been a strong advocate to put the North, the high North, in the center of those conversations. So I'm looking forward today to this exchange. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all. Let's get to some questions, and I have a handful of questions just to get us all thinking about our topic. And I will call on Ollie at the right time to look for questions from the audience. My sense is that we can all agree that the needs of the North are almost infinite, and at the same time fundamental to basic society. So where do we start? And I know that different communities, different territorial governments have their own priorities. Maybe a good starting point is to agree that if the needs are seen to be commercially feasible and commercially viable, then investment capital can be found and projects will get built. But what's missing? You know, it's obvious for us to say that given our perspectives in finance and in business, because we know it's done and it's done elsewhere in Canada. I don't sense a lack of will on anyone's part, but I do wonder and get frustrated about a lack of urgency. I guess my first question, and I think the good format is just have an open panel discussion on questions, so please pile in when you want to. Let's start with how each of you see the problem. Is it a question of there being a responsibility for the private sector to build a national consensus around northern issues? Who wants to take that on?
I think the think tank should take it on. So, well, why don't I start since I said something? So I think, obviously business has a responsibility to engage in being good corporate citizens and helping create an environment that allows business to do what it does, which is to, frankly, invest, create opportunity, and generate returns for shareholders, and ensuring that they do so in a way that helps advance the communities within which they operate. And I think when I look to the north, the challenge is, I mean, I agree with Doug. I think if you create the right environment, investment will come and take advantage of the opportunities that are there to create jobs. The challenge is that you look to places like the north, and Doug referred to this. I think there are three things which stand in the way of as significant an investment in the north as we'd like to have. And one of them is the significant problem of exogenous risks for business. So that is regulatory frameworks that create uncertainty, long time frames that create real challenges to stable returns, third-party risks where decisions that are outside of your control get in the way of you being able to make decisions in the course of the business. So you have, those are problems in the normal world, but in the north, in the environment that they're there, they get even more challenging. And so limiting the exogenous risks is often a role for government, because it's often regulatory, it's often frameworks. Second is, you know, if you have a normal box of risk that the private sector is used to mitigating and managing, it'll do that all day long. You know, an example, initially the Canada Infrastructure Bank, created to create infrastructure opportunities all across the country, was actually, in my view, initially it misconceived, because it thought that its job was to find a place for capital and to get capital to be interested in projects. That wasn't the problem. It was actually getting the government ready to create projects, because the money was there. The money is there for projects, but you need to do it in the context where money can, in the context of whatever businesses there are, they understand the risks, they're the kind that normally do every day. You know, it doesn't mean they'll make money, but at least they know how to manage and price those risks. And the third is an enabling environment, by which you mean like it's infrastructure and social license. Business can help in that, but at the end of the day, the significant infrastructure of ports or airports or power outside of diesel, of road and rail, governments need to play a role in creating those kinds of infrastructure so businesses can come in and then in the normal box of risk, take the box of risk and make jobs and make opportunity. And then social license, which is, as I said, like we have an Indigenous reconciliation plan, but in the context of a broader social license, and until unless the Indigenous or other end communities are willing to see it, as an example, in the north, I mean, we had the panel before, I'm talking about NATO investment. There was some resistance in the north to defense infrastructure. right? Well, maybe in this new environment, if you find a way in a dual usage world to have defense infrastructure and economic infrastructure, maybe some of that goes away, but that's a role for government. It creates that social license, and then business can weigh in behind. So if those three things are managed, brought and under control by government with business support, then business can go do its job.
So, Doug, if I can add some thoughts to a part of your question about the narrative here, and what does business need to do to speak to the narrative? And I'm actually seeing some wisdom in having part of the panel in Jamaica, some in Atlanta, and the rest in Toronto talking about the Arctic. Because the 360 in Arctic 360 is not just seeing the Arctic from full circle, but it's understanding that the Arctic is a global and certainly a hemispheric issue, and is very much in all of our interests down here in the south. So before I was at RBC, I was at the Globe and Mail for a number of years, including a time as editor. And one of the coolest things I got to do as editor was to launch a project on the Arctic. And it was inspired in some ways by Adrienne Clarkson when she was Governor General. She spoke about the Arctic being part of our collective imagination. And it was always there in the public mind. It's like having a big backyard that's in your mind. And I thought, okay, that sounds very poetic, but doesn't sound very pragmatic. And the Arctic is much more than just this sort of mythical place of like nirvana that floats off there. It needs to be much more connected in all of our, not just imaginations, but in our realities. So we then dispatched a team of reporters and photographers right across the Arctic and did a whole project around the Arctic. And that's the sort of thing that in business we're going to need to do more of helping Canadians see the pragmatic side of this. And we have a moment here, as we just heard, of a new reality vis-a-vis the United States. We're actively engaged with a range of businesses across the country, as well as governments, in advancing a framework of how do we think about North American security. It's about way more than cross-border frictions and tariffs. And we're working with a construct around border security, energy security, and Arctic security. In part because those are clear signals from the U.S. administration and our conversations with them about what matters to them and when they think about North American security. So as business, and we've certainly had a wake-up call with the tariff threat of the last week, and that's not going to go away. We realize billions of dollars of business opportunity is at stake here. Well, part of our way of managing that risk is to invest in Arctic opportunities, but Arctic requirements as well, not just on a commercial basis, but ensuring that Canadians as a whole are approaching this responsibly, but also with enough strategic sense to make sure that we get it right.
Yeah, maybe I'll add, and this is a perspective from the mining industry, which in large part helped to build this great country. The mining industry is an industry that knows how to take risks, knows how to manage risks. A lot of industries in Canada who will be involved in the discussion will just bring talk to the table. It's time for action. It's not time for more talk. Prime Minister Diefenbaker ran on a platform of developing the North more than 60 years ago, and here we are. We're still talking. We need to talk, but it's time to actually get things moving. And if investors are going to look at the North with a sharp pencil, then they're going to sit on the sidelines. Industry has to lead. Government will not lead here. Industry has to lead. If you think of the Arctic like we would think of Timmins in the early 1900s or Cobalt, Ontario in the early 1900s, the government provided very little in the way of infrastructure, very little in the way of vision. It was the companies, including banks, the CIBC was there and established their first branch. We need that type of thinking today to take advantage of the opportunity. We're in the fortunate position as a mining company that we hear the hopes and aspirations of the residents of Nunavut particularly, which would extend across the entire North. And I would use the word hope. They have hope and they have aspirations for the same benefits that we enjoy here. That's where industry has the opportunity to not only, particularly the mining companies who can establish a solid business foundation that other industries can build upon, we have the opportunity to not only generate return for our shareholders, but also bring hope to those communities and hope for those young people. And that's what we need now. And so we've been very active. I've been personally very active as I transitioned to chair in Ottawa. And really in the last 40 years, I never really spent much time in Ottawa. We didn't need to. We've actually built a business, a successful business, one of Canada's top 20 companies by market cap, with very little government assistance in infrastructure. We've done it ourselves. So we bring those skills to the table, and it's going to need that type of risk-taking. It's going to need that type of thinking, but it's going to need a grand vision. If we just sort of piece it together bit by bit, we're not going to get something coherent at the end of the day. So it's up to industry to actually push the government. That's what we've been trying to do over the last 18 months. And this is how you do it. Mining isn't all science, and the investment decision isn't all science. We're fortunate. There's a fair amount of art in there, and we can rely on our geologists, on our people that have built mines, to look beyond what we currently have when we decide to make an investment decision. And we can make an investment decision where we're not quite meeting our hurdle rate at the time, but we have confidence in our ability to make it bigger, and that's been the case in the far north. I'll use Hope Bay as an example, and I'll use this because it's important. That's a project that Newmont tried to build, went for over $2 billion, walked away. Junior had it, they had no success, walked away. A Chinese entity attempted to buy it, had a shareholder-approved deal to buy it. The federal government quite rightly said no, and we picked it up within 2 weeks. Not an easy project. Dominic Girard's here, he's in charge of that. Initially when we did it, our team was saying, geez, do we really need that? We've got enough. That's not an easy one. What are we going to do? We paid $250 million. Why did we buy it? Why did we buy it? Because of the strength of our relationships, our experience in mine building in the north, but also sitting on fabulous geology. Fortunately for us, it's sitting on the northern coast of Canada in a pretty important geographical position in the country. It needs to be built. It will be built. We're running the numbers. It's not an easy project. If we were running a sharp pencil, we'll say, we're not going to build that one. We will build that one. We will make that one work. And for us, that's a platform and a stage for corporate Canada, for the government, to join us on the stage when we announce that we're going to build that project, to announce what they're also going to do to help build social infrastructure, and use that as a springboard for other investments there. What these conferences are important to do is to make connections, because it's going to take all of industry to work together. As a mining company, I don't really know what the shipbuilders are doing. I don't even know what the other industry players are doing. I don't really know exactly what the Department of National Defense is thinking. We need to know, and they need to know what we're thinking. And when we do that, we can pull the government along, because we're going to create a bandwagon that the government cannot afford to be not on it. And so now I'm getting worked up. I'll turn it back to Doug.
Wow, that was terrific. Louise.
Well, look, I agree with everything that's been said, and I'll be very brief. I totally agree. We need to have certainty. This is what the government can do. We change policy too often. So it's not just that we have a lot of regulation, is that we change them. We don't harmonize them between provinces and territories and the federal government. There's many layers of government to go through to get projects approved. So we definitely need to have a new way to approach regulation in Canada, and we need to provide certainty over a long period of time. Because this is what happens. Big projects like pipelines, they take years to build, a decade, and rules are changed along the way. And so you have to adapt as you go. And so that's extremely damaging, I think, for investments and for investors. And I think we really need to focus on that. The other thing that I would add is we need to build back the trust between the business community and the government. Look, I come from the public sector, I know, and now I'm in the private sector, and I can assure you that it's like we don't speak the same language, and it's understandable. We have different mindsets, but we're going to have to come to the table, and we're going to have to restore some level of trust there and understanding. And I think that will be absolutely necessary to do the things we want to do. Last point that I want to make is we're not going to be able to do this alone, Canada. I'm sorry, there's not enough capital in our country. There's a lot. We have a lot of pension plans. We have actually quite a bit of capital in Canada. But doing something like this over such a wide territory with the complexities that it will take, we need foreign investment. And capital will flow, as it was said, if we provide the winning conditions to attract it. So we really all have to sit down, and I totally agree with the vision. And we need to sell that vision, not just to Canadians, but on the world stage.
Thank you. That was a great discussion, and it brings me back to a couple of other things that I want to circle back to. But Sean, maybe I can pull the thread a little bit more on capability. In your world, your company, as you outlined, builds complicated mines in some of the world's harshest environments and in a commodity market that can be equally unforgiving. Tim, I would say the same is true for AECON. There's probably no better company in the world for building big, complicated projects. So I guess my point is neither of your companies lack technical expertise or capabilities, the word that we used in the intro. I would suggest that as long as you can tick the boxes of financial feasibility, regulatory compliance, stakeholder support in the broadest sense, we've got lots of capability to do things. RBC can finance anything in the world that needs to be financed. But it sort of takes me back to this political will. And I know that the purpose of the question or the purpose of the session is to talk about what industry can be doing. But it strikes me that we can't let government off the hook here. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. And you're absolutely right, is that we can't let them off the hook. But my experience over the last 18 months is that we're going to have to pull them along. Unfortunately, that's the reality. And I would agree with the comments that we're going to have to make a case to 40 million Canadians why we need to invest in the North for their kids and their kids' kids. And we can do that. But I think also is we have to learn to live with uncertainty. And the people in the North know that. They've lived for thousands of years in a harsh environment. And that's one of the reasons why we felt from day one when we first went up there in 2007, we said to ourselves as we flew back from Baker Lake, we can do business here because the capacity is there, the capability is there. There's no question it's a harsh environment. But I think what I found in talking to the government is that nice policy paper on critical metals, but when you ask them, okay, where are the deposits? Well, isn't that your job? Well, I'm telling you as a mining person, the policy sounds nice, but there isn't a long list of deposits ready to be built. And a big part of that is around economics. So we're in the fortunate position we have a pipeline that we can build projects. There still needs to be investment in infrastructure, but I think they're struggling as to where and what. And I think that's why we need that coordination to be able to spell it out. And so we have an opportunity, at least Agnico does, to announce a significant investment in an important part of Nunavut. And it's an important part of Nunavut because of its physical location, because of the history behind it, and the fact that one of our adversaries was trying to own it. And those are the types of examples that we can use to send a message to Canadians, but also send a message to the government. And what we've been saying for 18 months, look, we're going to announce it at some point. Be on the stage with us. Be on the stage with a checkbook. Be on the stage with a checkbook for social infrastructure for the communities because they need it, but also a bigger checkbook along that bigger vision where we need to put the infrastructure. So it will happen, but I think it's industry's responsibility to help create that sense of urgency. Certainly what we've seen over the last few weeks is going to do it. If we don't get it now, then we're never going to get it.
So I agree with all that, and I think though that so political will, always responds, as you said, Doug. I mean, it responds to the context within which the political actors are operating, the number of votes, the issues of the day, and I think the world changed last weekend for Canada. It was already changing, but I think it became obvious to a whole lot of Canadians, which creates actually a ton of space for Canadian political leaders, I think, to invest in ways that they never invested before. And so I think, you look at it, the geopolitical environment is different because of, we were operating for the last 40, 50 years in a rules-based global trading order with a reliable partner where we were creating free trade agreements where, a small, medium power could thrive and do okay because it was about right, not might. Geopolitical order has changed. The security environment has changed, right? So we are looking at, a world where regional and, larger than regional conflicts are increasing, or the risk of them are increasing. We have suddenly been faced with the unreliability of our neighbor to the south in that rules-based context. We unquestionably diversify our trading and economic relationships. We put a lot of eggs in one basket. It became self-evident that that's a challenge for us. We've got climate change, which is an ever-urgent priority, but creating both challenges and opportunities in the north, from melting permafrost to opening seaways. And then you have the whole tech revolution and AI and the critical minerals that backstop and support it. All of those things at the same time, in my view, should have us all turn north to the opportunities that are there. Just in the context of we're going to have to invest 2% or more of our GDP in defense. And frankly, subject to that 20% that has to be spent on materials, a whole ton of that should be in the north. Feeding not just the military priorities and the security priorities, but responding to that energy security priority, to our need to develop and be present in the north, to doing our fair share for our defense of the North American continent. So I think there's a huge political opportunity that we in the community, including business, need to say, yeah, we support, let's go, we're ready to invest. And I agree, it's the government there in infrastructure, but private sector, we're ready to spend its money. And we as one player are eager and ready to go.
So, Doug, you kicked off posing a provocative question about sovereignty. It's got me thinking sovereignty rests on many things, but it is secured by people, economy, and military in different forms. So if you're going to have sovereignty in a territory, you need people there. You can have unpopulated sovereign areas, but that's hard to sustain over long periods of time. There are populations all across the north, everyone here knows that. But we need to think more and invest more in the social infrastructure to keep people there, to help them thriving, and to attract people. So we're having meaningful conversations with a couple of premiers about housing, as an example. And what can we do as a bank to facilitate more accessible housing and housing finance? We know how to do that, but that's going to take CMHC and some other government entities approaching Arctic housing more creatively, and they're in competition with population centers like Toronto and Vancouver, which also want that capital for housing. So how do we collectively say, well, okay, this is only for maybe 30,000 people in total. It's a fraction of Scarborough, but it's in the national interest to ensure that we are building the infrastructure for populations to thrive there. And secondly, on the economy front, how do we attract more business, not just in mining, although that's critical, to the north? Well, that also requires infrastructure, and it's more challenging economically to build infrastructure for a bunch of reasons in the north than in most other places, which means government, again, is going to have to lead the way. And there's interesting insights, I think, to be drawn from TMX, the pipeline we're the lead financier on it. where the government had to buy the pipeline and use its balance sheet to finance it. And yes, it went over budget. But it was also incredible what got done, and now people are starting to recognize, boy, we're really lucky to have that, because when we talk about diversification, that pipeline is important. So how do we help Canadians understand, okay, there's one pipeline, we're going to need more like that, rail, fiber as well. It's not just about pipelines. But there's some interesting collaborative approaches between the private sector and government that we can draw from TMX. But a critical part of TMX, which I don't think has gone recognized enough, is the regulatory force that government used. You hear about certainty, but because the government owned the project, they were able to twist a lot of arms, provincially, federally, and locally, and at all sorts of agencies, in that nicest Canadian way of saying, but like, we need this permit this week, and your funding is on the table, so let's get it through. So that was an important consideration to that economic pillar. And then on the military side, we are going to have to come to grips as a nation with the militarization of the Arctic. And I know that sounds harsh, and a lot of Canadians will maybe bristle at that suggestion, but it is becoming sort of the great game of this century. We know what the Chinese and Russians are doing militarily in the region, and we and our allies, principally the United States, are going to have to think not just about a military presence in a more significant way, in all forms, including cyber, maybe especially cyber, and satellites, but in dual-use approaches, which helps with the financing, helps with the commercialization, if you have ports and rail, landing strips, for instance, that are dual-use. But that's a different Canadian conversation than we're probably used to. This is a hot moment, so people are probably more comfortable with that. But I think ahead to like 5 years from now, when maybe it isn't such a hot moment, how do we ensure that if we're going down that road, that we have the kind of durability as people, because governments come and go, hot issues come and go. How do we ensure that there isn't that commitment, so we don't lose that, as Louise said, that certainty?
Maybe if I could just follow up on the housing, because that's great to hear, because that is one of the key social needs, and we find that even though we've got, the communities we're in, they're really well-paying jobs, housing supply is a real issue. So again, this is about, you mentioned a moment, we would agree we're in a moment here, and the moment is calling for action. And so we can do what we do in the mining space, but it's about messaging, and it's about sending a message to our allies and our adversaries, but also to our fellow Canadians that the North is important, and there is a plan, and there are companies that care, and there are companies that are doing smart things. So my question would be to the internal thinking of the bank, who were working along trying to pull a housing initiative together, which we know would not be easy. Has the sense of urgency around the housing discussion picked up over the last 2 or 3 weeks, or will it pick up? Because that's a perfect opportunity for the Royal Bank or any bank to be able to message and stand up and say, here's how we're doing our part to invest in the communities and invest in the social infrastructure that they need.
I would say it hasn't, and that's one of the risks that's on my mind. There seems to be a lot of agreement on the need to invest more in defense and on taking a more militaristic approach to our presence in the Arctic. But there's a civilian question there, and if we're going to do more militarily or infrastructure-wise in the North, you also need permanent populations for all sorts of reasons that are apparent or maybe not apparent. And we are not taking that as urgently as those other issues. So
yeah, that's a big opportunity.
That.
That's a big opportunity because there's nothing more important than a house and a home, let's say. And these are powerful messages, and it goes back to the young people in those communities are looking for hope. And if the largest bank in Canada steps up in the short term and says, we have been working for a while and we've pulled this together, and here's a program that we're going to backstop or help move forward and create more housing supply, man, that creates a ton of hope in those communities.
Louise?
Well, I'll just add, I mean, we often talk about China sort of in a sovereignty space as well as the Russian Federation. But China is a competitor internationally, and a lot of the resources that exist in the north, the mining and otherwise, really we're in a world competition with China. And they drive the price down of a lot of the commodities that make it really difficult to compete. So we're going to have to figure that out. We also need, if we're going to make major investments in terms of extractives and otherwise, we also, I think, need to line up clients in advance. And this is where we really need a big project. We need to show we're serious, and we need to make sure that we secure those investments as much as we possibly can. So I think that that's an important component. In terms of, the housing and the whole piece, I mean, this is not my area of expertise, but clearly there's an issue of cost of living. We feel it everywhere in Canada, but I think in the north it's felt even more acutely. So we have to look into how do we really make it livable there and attractive to live there? Incentives, whether they be tax incentive or otherwise, so that you do really attract the talent that you're going to need to do the projects that we want to make. So those were the 2 points I just wanted to add. It's just this would be how you attract above and beyond from a cost of living, from a monetary point of view.
And maybe I'll jump in. Sorry, I keep jumping in, but just on China. China's still active in the north. The Chinese ambassador to Canada late last year was going to all the communities in the north. And this is after they were told that they couldn't own Hope Bay. So they're not going anywhere. They still see opportunity. And we were sort of surprised to hear that they were running around to the communities and talking to community leaders. So that's just a reminder that unless we sort of take the lead in the north, that we still have adversaries that are around.
But I think there's room for creativity, including in social infrastructure. Like if we get serious about building dual-use infrastructure in the north, of investing significantly in mining and other projects, as well as building enabling infrastructure, roads, rail, power generation that isn't diesel, et cetera, and then also invest from a defense perspective in the north, it'll be a significant amount of money that creates good paying jobs, opportunity. And I understand the cost of living in the north is much higher, and the challenges of fly-in supply chains and all of those things are issues. But if you create enough of an opportunity, some of that stuff starts to get more easy to handle, and some creative financial solutions start getting possible. And I think about, our company does a lot of work in the nuclear space. We're basically the largest construction company in Canada, doing every nuclear plant in the country. And I think we do a ton of work in Bruce, right? So you go back when Bruce was thinking about, what was its future, there was a lot of uncertainty and very low housing prices up there, and some stagnation. And you go up down there, it's incredible, right? I mean, there are seas of extended cab F-150s parked in every parking lot, a ton of new housing, which is created by the economic opportunity created by the refurbishment and the continuing presence of those Bruce. So it's, now I understand it's a drive-in, it's not a fly-in, but still, I think if we're serious about investment in the north, that gap between the economics of housing that's affordable and housing you can build starts to shrink. And as it starts to shrink, opportunities get created for the private sector to get involved, for creative banks to get involved, to help provide solutions to that.
Louise, you said something, so I just want to jump in if I can, because I think it's an important point, not just to fly by, about price. And one of the biggest challenges, and Sean, I'm a little hesitant saying this with an expert like you on the stage, but in mining finance is just the volatility of pricing. So it's very challenging, forget about a bank, but for more those with a bigger risk appetite to take on some of these projects, even greater with critical minerals. If you've seen the volatility of lithium over the last couple of years, and it's true right across the table, it gets very hard for someone looking at a 10 or 20 year investment. So as a country, we're probably going to need to think through how do we create floor mechanisms for this, because it's not just the great volatility of mining, which is everyone signs up for, but there are other actors in the world who I think we all know who are active in the market to drive price down at key moments, just when people like Sean are trying to raise money or do something. And they're very, very good at it. So we're going to have to take a bit more of the same collective muscular approach to say, we're going to be in the market, somehow securing price, especially for our producers.
I think that's 100% right, and I think with the change, what we found just engaging government, and I think this crowd and others should appreciate the keen interest that the U.S. government has in what's going on in the North. The State Department's been to our mines. They constantly are looking to get site visits. We have our government relations, Brad Riders here. When Brad and I go to Ottawa and host an event, mid-November, cold, midweek, we get 4 people from the U.S. Embassy there. They're keenly aware and want to know what's going on up there. But they're also reaching out in the critical metals area and wanting to know what's going on, and are prepared to give the floor price for certain critical metals. I'm going to Washington early next week for meetings there. And so they have a keen interest. So there's a source of funding there that could be project specific, where you could create some of that certainty to get projects built. And we have to understand that. We have to discuss that. That's not going to impact our sovereignty. But we've always said, and we'll take money from other countries, but for the development of certain industries and certain deposits in certain regions, we strongly feel that it should be Canadian companies based in Canada, run by Canadians with our Canadian sensibilities doing the work, because we're going to get a better result in the communities. We'll take foreign money, and Agnico is a perfect example. 75% of our shareholders are non-Canadian. So we've been taking capital from outside of Canada and have built a company over 60 years. So you can still do it and control how you do things. And the how is going to be really important in the North.
Are there any lessons that we can take from some of our Nordic neighbors? They seem to have a much healthier appetite for putting critical infrastructure in their Arctic regions. Are they just more patient? Do they have a different, they presumably have the same engineering challenges and the same financial challenges, but they seem to be having success where we're not. Anyone have a view on that?
You start.
Louise.
Oh, perfect.
Look, I'm speculating here, but I don't think I'm straying too far. I think that one of the problems we have in Canada actually is the political pendulum that just swings back and forth. We don't seem to commit to national projects over the lifespan of a government. And I've seen it. I saw it at the UN. Obviously, our campaign for the UN Security Council was seen as a liberal project. It wasn't seen as a national project. A national project. But we went against other countries, Ireland and Norway, whose campaigns spanned many different governments, and they never swayed in their interests to get the seat. Well, they got it. So I think that part of the issue is that what we were talking about, that certainty, that consistency, that continuity, just doesn't seem to jive well with our political culture in Canada. We just go from one side of the pendulum back to the other, and the new person gets elected and destroys everything that the other did before and goes in a different direction. So that's not a conducive environment for business to invest and for those long projects to take hold. The Harper government had a plan du Nord. Quebec, Jean Charest had a North plan, Le Plan du Grand Nord, I think I can't remember the exact name of it. There you go. It just went down in abeyance. So I think the fact that we just don't stay steadfast and true over a long period of time is something that is, unfortunately, it just goes with the Canadian territory these days. And I think we probably need to take issues like this outside of this sort of that debate nexus of politics. And it has to be a Canadian project, not a party project.
So, you want to go? Doug, I'm going to jump in, because I actually disagree with that. Are we allowed in panels to disagree? I actually don't think it's a political problem. I think it is more to do with the structural context within which those countries and we operate. I mean, we had a massive entity to our south that has a huge market that was historically easier to get to, easier to make decisions to invest in, to sell to. There was, we're a vast geography with a small population, largely across that our southern border, the U.S.'s northern border. I just think when you look at where, the easy things for us to do lie, that path became easy to do. And some of those big national projects that I think some of the, the Scandinavian and others, the northern taggers or whatever you want to call it, they had a necessity requirement. They had a less obvious market in some cases. In others, their biggest neighbor was a military threat. And so I think, and my sense in Canada is actually on the political winds of change between governments haven't been that significant as one place. I went back and looked. I was chief of staff to a prime minister. Looked back at the policy statement we did in 2004-05. We talked about the Arctic in it. Stephen Harper, he sent me back to the practice of law, but his policies weren't that far off in terms of a look north. I think he put more rhetorical interest. Now, what happened was he announced, I think, a port that he wanted to build in the north in 2007. It's opening this year, right? So the effort continued. It wasn't stop and start. It just didn't have a political priority, regardless of who was in government. And so I think that reflects the nature of the world within which Canada was operating, which is why I think there's a different moment now. It may be a hot moment, but it feels like something more is happening.
I had one quick thought on one difference is sovereign wealth funds, and we're not going to have a sovereign wealth fund in this country, I don't think, but we do need to continue to think about how pension funds allocate capital, and there will be lots of more policy ideas coming out of Stephen Polo's work and other thinking on this, not to force it to happen, but to create the right incentives for those, especially the large funds, which want to allocate more capital, not gigantic amounts more, because they do need diversification, but materially more than they have in the last cycle. But we need to create conditions for them to. There's going to be no guaranteed return. That's not what investing is about. You want a risk premium, but to ensure that there is better odds of a competitive return on those projects in this country.
So just specifically, just to follow up on the nuclear, the key to unlocking it all is energy.
Yeah.
It's energy because of its remoteness and its modular reactors. Like, that's the key. And I know, there's lots of work being done, and people say, well, it's 2035, it's 2032, whatever it is, that can't come soon enough, because 30% of our costs would be energy, diesel, which is not great for the environment. If we can get a nuclear solution there, it just opens up the entire region. Now, that won't be easy, because among the local population there is concern about uranium, etc., which means you're going to need the right partner with the right relationships, the right track record to be able to say, this is why this makes sense, and we have a track record of doing this responsibly and properly. And so those are the things that I think we have to work towards. And I know, talking to Liberal cabinet ministers over the last year and a half, that was a priority. They were saying, look, how can the mining industry help us accelerate the move towards implementation of modular nuclear reactors? So that's going to be critical to taking maximum advantage of the potential that exists in the north.
Can I quote you in our next annual report? But it's no question energy is a huge component of extractive industries, but anything we're going to do in the north, and diesel is just a totally unsustainable way to do it. Are there, we need to look at renewable, nuclear, whatever sources of power that can be, I think, reflect more the principle of respecting the land than some of the other ways of doing it. From our perspective, we think, we're working with OPG right now on the SMR technology. There are others around the globe that are doing that. We hope it's earlier than that, but we think its deployment at appropriate scale can be a very helpful way to bring energy more in a better environmental way and reasonably efficiently to remote areas, but everywhere.
I want to come back to Louise's point, though, about short attention spans amongst governments. I think we're living in a moment where short-termism, whether in government or in commerce, is really the bane of building projects that have big, long lead times. Sean, your world is about building a project that you might be long retired before you get the gold out of the ground, but you still have to make the decision, and you don't make it on a quarter-to-quarter basis. You're making it for a decade and 2 decades and 30 years out. Remember when the diamond mines were first started? Well, we're almost at the end of the design life for many of them. And it just seems like it was yesterday when diamonds were discovered and mines were built. But I don't want to get on a hobby horse, but I do think that short-termism works against trying to do some of the things we're trying to do.
I would agree. And if you think about the people of the North, they think long-term. They're very patient. And we think long-term as a business, but we act very quickly when the door opens to get things built. We can build a $2 billion mine in 2 barge seasons, so we have the skill set to be able to do that. So I think that, I get it, that we need more vision. We get that, but we need action, and we need those players that are able to move quickly when the opportunity presents itself. And as we've said, the government's role now is to create the conditions for business to be successful there. We just have to coordinate it, and we can think long-term where we may want to be in 10 or 15 or 20 years, but we got to get moving now. And it won't be perfect. If we wait till everything's tied up, then we won't be doing anything. But there's a lot of smart people in this country, and there's a willingness among the communities. Let's think about how Nunavut was formed and created in the late 1990s. They selected 18% of the land mass as part of the agreement with the federal government, and they selected it using geological consultants to pick the best rocks. The people of Nunavut are in the resource development business, and that's different than a lot of other places in Canada. So we have willing partners that are embracing mining as the foundation to get an economic uplift, but then it's up to the rest of us to round it out with industry that gives them other career opportunities and other economic opportunities.
I was delighted to read in this morning's Globe and Mail Jessica's pitch for building the new version of the St. Lawrence Seaway, but doing it in Arctic waters in cooperation with Denmark and the United States. It's a big idea, for sure. I think we seem to have forgotten how to do big things in this country. And I am continuously frustrated by that. And maybe it's time, though, for Canada to step up, both as a defensive tactic and also to drive a better concept of our sovereignty in the North. Can we spend a few minutes talking about that, Louise? Maybe I'd ask you to kick it off, if you would.
Sure, Doug. Well, no, and we haven't really talked a lot about shipping so far, and that's a big part of the promise of the North, as we know, and the region is close to three huge global trading blocks. So I'm sure it's been discussed. I'm not on site, but I'm sure it's been covered today, just how critical that Northwest Passage is going to be, and obviously we're not the only ones interested in it, and there's some. It's being contested. I think that we really do have to think big. I think there are, economic reasons for it. There's sovereignty reasons for it. I also think that it's not just a business and investment issue. I think we need to take our case internationally. I think we need to talk about our Arctic internationally. We're on the council, we do certain things, but we haven't really made it at the center of what we talk about when we talk about Canada. It's there, but it's not central. And I think if we're going to create the conditions where we're going to have partners like Denmark, the United States, which has its own risks, but I think we also need to just sell our vision internationally for the Arctic and for the piece of it that that is Canadian. So I think that's what I'd like to say to start off. I'm not an expert on how you build it, how you build the ports, but I just wanted to provide a bit of the context in which you start to do something like this in the international arena. And I think we're coming from behind a little bit.
Anyone on the panel want to weigh in on this?
Well, AECON helped build the St. Lawrence Seaway, so we're ready to go. We're ready to go. I think I was thinking back to the comment about the political winds changing, but I actually think, as I said, I think it's the short-termism in politics is actually the real problem. Big things occasionally do happen. I mean, frankly, TMX was a big thing. And, it's first pipeline in Canada in 50 years or something, or 40 years. I'm actually weirdly excited by the challenge we are facing right now, because I think the opportunity for big things actually is most easily done in moments of crisis. And I think we're actually in one. The question, I would say the one challenge we've seen in our federal government in particular is the articulation of what they want to do and the implementation of it don't always match up very well. And I think we need to find ways as industry to help the government understand how implementation can be better done, to be at the tables and say, no, if you do it this way, we can all work much better together. And that is one important role for all of us in this room who talk to the Canadian government, is to say not just the great ideas, but how we get them done.
I suggest, I know our time is running out, there are, among other challenges, there's three critical ones, we call them the 3 Rs, rivalry, revenue, and reconciliation, which we haven't talked nearly enough about here. So rivalries, coming to grips with the reality that the Arctic is now a zone of rivalry, and the Arctic Council was created in a different time, more as a peace table of a way of bringing people together. So how willing are we to be that it is now an area, a region of rivalry, and then starting to develop strategic options there. Revenue, especially on the infrastructure side, you need a revenue model ultimately, and that's something Canadians often are discomforted by, especially if there needs to be broader public access to that. But we need to think about the revenue models, especially for those dual use in infrastructure. And then reconciliation. I mean, I'm sure there's other sessions here on that, but when we talk about the challenges of getting things done in this country, it's often for very good reasons of reconciliation, of free, prior, informed consultation, and of consent. And in many parts of the country, these are legally binding. So how are we going to balance this need to do big things, do them quickly or at pace, but do them without disavowing our commitments to reconciliation?
Yeah, I think if you look at the Twitter feed of the Premier of Nunavut in the last week or so, he's extremely positive about where they can help Canada. deal with a lot of these issues, and they're ready to cooperate and work hard, which is always a good sign. So I think we have the basis to collectively move forward more quickly than we have in the past.
Wonderful. I think we're rapidly running out of time, but I do want to leave us time for Q&A. So maybe, Ollie, I could bring you back on.
AQ.
Yep, I'm here, Doug, and I'll see if we got any questions in the room. We do have 5 or 6 minutes. We got one. Jessica's down here. Jessica, go ahead.
Yes, hi. You know what, I've been taking notes as we've been discussing, so maybe I'll just throw a few things out and you guys can comment on them. Well, one of the things that I think is an opportunity as well, though, we talk about housing and as a social infrastructure, and as Madeline points out all the time, you can't build houses if you don't have the energy and if you don't have the telecommunications, if you don't have the water. So the infrastructure piece kind of all folds together. But at the same time, coming out of D&D, right, they want to build multi-purpose, multi-user infrastructure. So it's not just dual use. And so this gets into the social, economic, and defense infrastructure where there are so many overlaps, because if you have to build energy for one, you need to build energy for the other. I also think in terms of and there's others here who can absolutely speak from their own perspective in the north, but like there's the Mackenzie Valley Highway, for instance, and they're positioning that road, which is a critical piece of infrastructure, as a national defense issue. And so you have a lot of now, and when it comes to the critical mineral space too, you've got all these juniors there and mining and talking though about how this speaks to national security and defense. And so I don't think these things are really offside, right? It's not like we need to, the discussion to talk about social, economic, and defense infrastructure as part of almost one conversation, I don't think is that difficult. And then also I just want to, yesterday I was speaking with MP Zimmer, and that was one thing, is, some of these, we have to have the long vision, and we're talking about, throwing the bath out or the baby out with the bath water, and every time there's a new government. But I think that these issues, social, economic, and defense, are all party. That's an all-party platform right there. And so I'm just wondering, is there a mechanism, I don't know, how do you get, a government to kind of come in and build some sort of support that's going to promote something, so they can put their goods on the table and say, okay, I'm not going to see the fruits of it for 20 years from now, but they will see the fruits of it because it was something that they started 20 years ago and get to claim their name to in that way. And so that's just one thing. And then, and I would say, John, you were asking what some of the takeaways were. One of them is I think that Americans would love to come in with their government and their private capital and set up shop all along the coast of the north. We want, foreign direct investment, and we're going to need it. And also, though, we do not want to be sitting on the sidelines then when that happens. And so it was just, those are like the main things. Those are the main things that I would just kind of wanted to bring up. And I'm going to say one more thing, because this is me. I keep talking. So we had the Swedish ambassador here several years ago, and he looked around, and I don't recall the question, but he just looked at everyone and he said, just build it, because the return on investment is exponential. And for us, our North 20 years ago was our Achilles heel, and now it's our economy, and it's our driving force of our economy, and it's our future. And so I think it's just, how do we bring us all together? So, I appreciate everyone's comments. I don't know what you.
That felt like a wrap-up.
And there's my question. So
it felt like a wrap-up, actually. Governments respond to what voters ask them to do. So our responsibility is to create the voter demand for the action that we're talking about here. And events like this are part of that. I think, the international context is part of that. But I think at the end of the day, if we want governments to invest, we need to demand it, and they'll respond to us.
At the end of the day, someone has to pay for it. And there's
the grateful taxpayer.
Well, there's an amazing agreement in the country right now on a lot of things because no one has been asked to pay for it.
Yeah.
So the NATO commitment, like everyone's for 2%, that's $10 billion more per year.
15.
15. I mean, it depends on your calculation, but 10 to 15 billion more a year that has to come from somewhere. So you want to take it from more debt? that will affect our credit rating as a country. That will increase the borrowing costs for everything we're talking about. None of this comes for free. So we have to make choices as a country. What are we going to give up to make these things happen? And then how do we collectively make that case to Canadians who may be asked to give up this or that or the other thing for these? So it's about prioritizing.
But that's why I really like the dual use as part of this, because or I guess 3 pillars. But at the end of the day, what we're saying is this investment creates potential for economic opportunity, which makes it an investment in our future, not just an investment in defense. So it doesn't. I agree. It doesn't pay for the whole thing, but it helps. That there's at least some return attached to the government dollars.
As you know, you can't just go to the market with potential. You have to have a business model. So back to the revenue point, like we have to map this out. Yeah. Again, someone's going to have to pay for that. So on tolls or whatever the costs are. So bit of an honest conversation, more than a bit, is going to be needed.
Yep.
Doug, I've got another question just at the back of the room here. I'll just hand over the microphone. One moment.
Hi, Pat Duxbury. I'm with the Inuit Development Corporation Association. Maybe it's more of a short story. So I forgot which panel member mentioned or stated just the need for a national project. Well, in the 1990s, the national project was the creation of the territory of Nunavut. And what did that new territory require? It required infrastructure, basically to house the government, which included staff housing, as well as buildings across the territory. So on the basis of a loan commitment that the governments of the day, federal government, agreed to, the Inuit Development Corporations put together a company called NCC, or the Nunavut Construction Corporation, and they had the exclusive right to build 250 staff houses, plus 11 institutional government buildings across 10 communities, and the Legislative Assembly. So very significant infrastructure build out. And basically that was entirely financed through RBC. And over time, there was a leaseback and a payback arrangement, which and resulted, among other things, in the creation of a company now, NCC, still 100% Inuit owned, which now is the strategic partner with the government of Nunavut on the Nunavut 3000 housing project. So it was a role that basically it took a vision back then, but it led to obviously development of an institution, a local business that now is being able to help address some of the housing issues across the territory, and would also perhaps be a partner, ideally, with the Government of Canada on things such as the defense files. So I just wanted to leave that with you guys, maybe a comment, but just wanted to say that we've been here before, and we could go there again.
Okay.
I think, Doug, it's back to you at that point.
Okay. Well, listen, Louise Blais, Sean Boyd, Tim Murphy, John Stackhouse, thank you so much for contributing your expertise and your insight. And I hope for the audience this was a very informative session. So please join me in a round of applause.
Stay warm, Doug.